Now we are on to the section on communication skills, which are a very big part of treatment and counseling. See pages 152 to 156 in your textbook, which describes 12 roadblocks to communication. Ordering, directing, and commanding might be an important skill in an emergency, but in counseling, this makes the client feel as if they don't have a choice when their counselor is ordering them around and telling the client what to do. It assumes that the counselor knows best and doesn't involve the client's view of the problem or involve the client at all in the problem solving. Be sure to read over all 12 of the roadblocks in communication. If you were to watch a comedy, kind of a parody of a counseling session, you would hear the counselor alternating between two different phrases. So, how does that make you feel? And, I understand. Overuse of these phrases can really turn off your client, and the client will doubt your sincerity. At this point, avoid using those two phrases. I would consider use of those phrases as lazy counseling. You can do better. When you communicate with your family and friends on an everyday basis, there's a familiarity, a humor, sometimes a sarcasm that can develop. When communicating with your clients, you will need to respond in a professional manner. In your video submissions, I want to see the professional communication throughout your demonstration. Use complete sentences, good grammar, and interest and emotion in your voice. You are in charge of creating the first impression for your client, and you are responsible for the flow of communication during the session. One session at a time. Your goal is always to have the client come back for the next session. This doesn't mean that the session is always pleasant and that the counselor should not provide any honest feedback. Quite the opposite. Think that you are being paid for your professional services to do something above and beyond what the client could get from their friends. You need to get to know your client and to obtain information, but this is done in a professional manner. When you go into your session, be sure to do your preparation prior to the session. Know what paperwork is required. Do a run-through of the questions. Be sure to think through how you are going to record the information. Boot up your computer and be ready for your session. Have a pen ready and available if you are writing down information. Nothing worse than leaving your client alone in an interview room because you have to go get a pen or go get a form that you forgot. On to Chapter 8, Listening. Listening is healing. This counseling and communication skill alone is very, very valuable. Active listening to the client results in a response that is needed. This is known as active listening. Restating is the lowest level of response, and reframing is the next lowest level of response. Restating is like a tape recording. Simple restatement of the client's words. Here's an example of restating. The client says, "I'm really mad that you came in late." And you say, "You're mad because I was late." The client says, "Yeah, if you can't be here on time, just let me know and I won't show up." Worker: "So you want me to let you know beforehand if I'm going to be late." Reframing is a refocusing technique that does not use the same words as the client's and tries to come up with a positive spin on the message. Here's an example of reframing. The client says, "I completely failed on my diet this weekend. After the late show on Sunday, I couldn't help myself. I raided the refrigerator. I'm hopeless." And the worker's response is, "You seem to be dwelling on how you failed. You were very successful on Saturday, weren't you?" Reflective listening is a higher level of response, above the two that we just went through, restating and reframing. Reflective listening is a therapeutic method with two parts. You reflect the feelings and recount the meaning of what the client has said. Respond to your client with the feeling that you were hearing. Only name one feeling at a time to slow down the processing of feelings and to not confuse the client. Use a single statement. Attempt to match the intensity of the feelings with what you are hearing. You do not use the same word that the client says. The second part of reflective listening is to recount the content of the client's statement. Again, do not use the same words as the client. Expand on what you have heard. The client will let you know if you miss the correct feeling or if you mess up the content. Of course, you're trying to be as accurate as you can in order to aid communication, and nothing builds trust faster than accurate reflection. "My counselor really understands me," lets you know that you have conducted the reflective listening accurately. Empathy has three parts: the ability to imagine yourself in your client's situation, find something in your own history that maybe you can relate to the client's situation, and then you can identify your own feeling. Number two, feeling to some degree as he or she does. And then, number three, making empathetic statements. Empathetic communication also includes appropriate facial expressions and tones of voice. You need to look and sound concerned. Your client can pick up on you faking it. What to do if you can't relate? It's a good idea to let the client know you are concerned about their pain, but you are having a tough time relating because you aren't sure how that feels. People will respond to honesty if you stay connected. Continue to ask about their feelings to keep the listening continuing. Reflective listening is not problem solving at this time. It is not advice giving. It is just listening and verifying the accuracy of the information you were given. If you listen reflectively long enough, the solutions will eventually come. Here are some other useful communication skills. Focusing, either directly or indirectly, helps the client to get back to the question or topic at hand. So focusing is a communication skill that the counselor uses to bring the client back on point. So they went off and they told you a big long story. Your skill of focusing is to bring them back to focus on a particular point. Furthering is a communication skill that is the opposite of focusing. In furthering, you are helping the client to expand the information when they initially give too little information. It usually consists of open-ended questions to further along the conversation or information sharing. Summarizing. Summarizing is used at the end of a particular topic, or at the end of a session, or at the end of the counseling relationship. Summarizing is very helpful and can include what has been covered in this session, what action steps should be taken next, and by whom before the next session, and where the next steps are going. Summarizing is a very important skill because people often need help to see their accomplishments and to understand what has been said or done to date. I find that most beginning counselors underutilize summarizing. Summarizing can be used when you get stuck. For example, you're not sure what to say next. Well, rather than try and figure out where to go next because you feel stuck, go ahead and summarize where you've been. The client will respond to your summarization, and that may get you unstuck and take you into a new direction. There are two minor problems that can occur when communicating with others. Sometimes you might assess your client's feelings inaccurately. Or number two, your mind wanders on occasion, but then you come back to focus on what the client is saying. Again, both of these are minor problems, and you can bring it back on track within a matter of seconds. There are three major problems, though, in communicating and listening. And if you find yourself doing any of these problems, then you are going to be a person that needs to really work on communication skills, especially in a counseling relationship. Number one, you cannot wait to pass judgment. So if you're listening and waiting and going to jump on something that the client has said, that becomes a problem. If you totally ignore the client's feeling and are now not able to reflect back those feelings, that's a problem because you do not notice and when the client is expressing their emotions. Or number three, You're not spending enough time in listening, and you can't wait to offer a solution. The worker rushes to the solution without truly understanding the underlying feelings that the client expresses. Let's review some of the communication skills and terms that we have been discussing. Restating is the same thing as using the same words. So the person says, "I'm feeling sad," and you say, "I hear that you're feeling sad." Same words. Reframing is taking those words into a little bit different direction. So it gives the client some new words to use. So for example, the client says, "I'm feeling really sad today," and you might explore it a little bit more, reframing it, saying, "I hear you saying that you're feeling really down today because of a situation." Okay, so you reframed sad, which is kind of one-dimensional, to feeling down, which then you're expanding the depth actually toward the positive end in terms of sad. Reflective listening talks about both feeling and content. You are putting yourself in the same person's shoes with empathy, and you are listening to what it would be like about what they are saying. Focusing is a communication skill that narrows the topic. If your client is going all over the place and you're trying to focus them back onto a point or focus them to a narrower topic. For example, one way you might do that would be to say, "I'd like to get back to this point," and then talk about that. So you're focusing the client. Furthering is when the client is actually being too brief and you would like to expand or focus. So again, you're the one controlling the conversation. You may say something like, "I'd like to ask you more about what you just talked about with your mother," and then let them further the discussion that you were having or add some more comments. Summarizing is one of the communication skills, and we're going to talk more about it, that is really underutilized. And whenever you feel stuck in a session and you're not sure where to go, you might summarize a group of themes that you're hearing about or topics, and then let the client go forward. So let's say the client was talking about their mother and you're not quite sure which way to go. You might say something like, "Let me summarize our session so far today. I know that you've been talking a lot about your mother. You said this, and you said this, and you said this. And so I'm wondering what you're making about these themes or points that you're bringing up today." And then let the client answer the question and tell you where they want to go, rather than you guessing what they are trying to say. So some very important communication skills. These are the terms. Review them, of course, before the quiz. Now, once you have listened, now it's on to asking questions. It is a common occurrence that new counselors may not have strong reflective listening skills. And when this occurs, the new counselor tends to rely on questions to fill in the silence of the session. When we use questions to fill in the silence, the client begins to feel interrogated and may become defensive. Questions are a way that the new counselor tries to take control of the session, but in so doing, you take away the control from the client. Remember, the session is always about the client and what they wish to cover. However, if you have a reluctant or mandated client, the new counselor feels responsible to fill the session with questions, which only increases the defensiveness of the already reluctant client. If you feel that this has happened to you in your session, back up. Go back to your open-ended question, to which then you can respond using reflective listening. This gets the session back on track. Closed questions. Closed questions are good for gathering basic information. Closed questions require a single answer of yes or no, or requires information to be given. Closed questions are appropriate when you need to fill out information on a form, but even then, try to expand upon the closed questions by following it up with an open-ended question. In the example on the slide, you might try to mix up the closed questions, because let's say you have to know the age of the daughter for your forms. And so you ask, how old is your daughter? And your client responds, she will be 15. Then go ahead and follow it up with asking, tell me one or two things you enjoy about your daughter. That way you've mixed things up without the client then feeling interrogated. Open questions give the client an opportunity to tell you what they wish to talk about, rather than what you wish to know. Generally, you will get more information with open questions, at the same time putting the client at ease because they have control of how much information they wish to share. Here's some examples on the slide. Tell me a little bit about your divorce. Can you describe the divorce court where your case was heard? Tell me about that lawyer. Avoid using the words when, why, where, or what. These are the words that denote just the facts, ma'am, and close down the questioning. See the examples above about how to open up questions. So the incorrect question, tell me a little bit about when you got here. A more open-ended way to say that would be, tell me about coming over today. In the first question, tell me a bit about when you got here. You might get 2 o'clock, a single answer. But tell me about coming over today. You might hear the frustration, my ride was late, I couldn't find my bus pass, etc. Gives the client a little bit more opportunity to share with you. Now I'm going to share a little bit with you about the structure of open questions. Also, look at your textbook on page 193. So we start an open question with an opener. Can you tell me? Can you share? Describe to me? And then add on a softener, a little something, and then the object of your question about your kids. Some other examples would be, could you give me a little more information about your job? Another example of an open question: can you share something about your childhood? Or, could you help me understand the problems with your medication? Those are all nice open questions. Why questions should be avoided at all costs. They imply that you would have chosen to do something else, or that the client should not have done what they did do. Don't ask multiple questions at once before the client has the chance to even answer the first question. Be sure that your questions follow the flow of the conversation. If you need to ask an off-topic question, let's say you have to get back on track to get your form filled out, then say, I need to ask you a few more questions to indicate that you are purposefully changing the topic. Take some time during your session to appreciate the client and to give good, solid, positive feedback. This leads to a positive feeling about the session, and the client will remember the feeling of the session and will want to come back. Positive feedback is different than empty false praise. False praise are things like, good job, I knew you could do it. Be specific. Use positive, specific feedback that is useful to the client so that the client can identify what they did that was positive, so that in fact they can do it again. You may have heard of I statements, which is a tremendous communication skill, both to use as a counselor and to role model for your clients to learn to use. I statements ensure that the speaker is taking responsibility for the statement. We use I statements when we have concerns that we need to express. Resist the temptation to solve the problem for the client. Rather, collaborate with the client to solve their own problems. In order to collaborate, start with an I message. This will enlist the client to collaboratively work with you to solve the problems. So let's say you make a suggestion and you start with an I message. So I would try to speak to your neighbor about that. What do you think? The what do you think is the invitation to collaborate.